Welcome to Nearpod Lesson 6.3, Identifying Types of Reactions and Toxins. So please make sure to remember to title your notes this, and by the end of this video, these are the two things you should be able to do. So far in Unit 6, we've been talking about how to make medications. We've talked about the basics of a chemical equation, so how to read something that looks like this. Right? A chemical equation is essentially a recipe for how to make some sort of a molecule. And we're currently trying to figure out how to predict what molecules or products will be made if we combine two different chemicals or molecules together, right? And in order to do that, we first need to be able to identify what type of chemical reaction something is. So for the 5 types of common reactions, right, I would definitely know the name and the general structure or order of each one of them. So let's start with the first one. So this one is called either a combination or a synthesis reaction. So it kind of has two common names. And if you notice, in a combination reaction, all these letters essentially represent separate molecules or elements. So in a combination or a synthesis reaction, molecule A and molecule B are separates. And then they're going to combine together into one molecule, right? So I would also note the general structure and the formats of a combination of or synthesis reaction is one molecule plus another molecule to make just one molecule, right? And eventually we're going to replace all of these letters with actual elements. It's nice to see what the general structure looks like so that we know what we're looking for. The way I remember this type of reaction is I think about it as like two single individuals. They kind of get together and then they form a relationship or a couple. So if I see a molecule plus a molecule to make one big molecule, right? They are forming a combination or a synthesis reaction. The second type of common reaction is a decomposition reaction. So it's kind of the opposite. So notice that molecule A and molecule B are combined together and then they separate or they break up, right? So in this structure, you start out with one whole molecule, A and B are together, and then after the arrow, they separate. Your third type of common reaction is what's called a single replacement reaction. So I'll usually have an element of some sort by itself, and it's going to combine with two elements or molecules that are already bonded or in a relationship together. And when that happens, someone in the relationship is going to get booted off, and then a new couple forms, right? So in a single replacement reaction, it's kind of like, I don't know, you can call it cheating, or maybe they had a mutual agreement to break up for molecule B and C, and then C immediately got with A right afterwards. Right? So that's how I remember a single replacement reaction. And if you think of a double replacement reaction in terms of relationships, that's our fourth type, you can kind of imagine what's going on here, right? So A and B are in a couple together, and C and D are in a bonded relationship together. And what happens when these two couples combine together? Well, they actually swap elements or they swap partners, right? So A, instead of being with element B, element A will get with element D, and element C which used to be with D, we'll get with element B instead. So they kind of just trade who they're dating. That is a double replacement reaction. The fifth and final type that you need to know of is what's called a combustion reaction, and it looks like this essentially. So I don't have a good analogy for this one. And this time, instead of letters that represent the elements, we have the actual elements. So in a combustion reaction, you always need some sort of fuel in the form of carbon and hydrogen, right? So this is a pure combustion. So the X and Y represents the numbers of carbon and hydrogen you have. So X and Y are numbers, not elements. And in order to combust or burn something, you need to mix it with oxygen or air. And when you combust something, you will always form CO2 and H2O along with energy from fire, right? So some of you might be like, wait, how is there water when you start a fire? And that's because the fire is so hot, it generates so much energy that you don't see the water vapor that comes off, right? Sometimes you might see it when you're first starting out a campfire and then it's kind of smoky. That tends to do with the fact that it's not burning hot enough, so you create a highly concentrated amount of steam in the form of carbon dioxide and H2O. So please make sure you have the names of each of these reactions and their general structures. In the next slide, we're going to go over some practice problems of how do we use these structures to identify what type of reaction we're looking at. Okay, so if you remember earlier from our Zoom class, for our classwork, we took a look at a couple of toxins and their chemical equations in our body. Now we're going to see if we can try to identify what type of reactions they are. So for this first one, we have the toxin ammonia, which forms this reaction that I've written up above. Notice that I got rid of the phases, so I don't really care whether it's gas, liquid, or aqueous. I also don't care about the coefficient at this point. I just want to see what's happening to the molecules. So here, notice that I have one molecule plus another molecule to form one molecule at the end, right? And you might notice that this is the same pattern as A plus B, arrow, AB, right? It all just mushes up together into one thing. This one doesn't look as clean because it's not like NH4 and then O, right? So it's written a little bit differently, but it's the same idea. So this is my A on top, and then it's plus some molecule B, and then arrow all the elements from A and B are just mushed up together. Right. If I saw the opposite of this reaction, it might look something like this. So if I have a reaction that was like Mg Cl2, Mg plus Cl2 like so, right? Notice that for this one, I'm starting with just one molecule before the arrow. It's not mixing with anything. It's just separating into two parts, right? So if I start out with one thing and it separates to two parts, this is a decomposition reaction, right? So this is just another example of the opposite happening. So since this one is something plus B combining to form one thing AB, this first one is going to be a combination, or you can call it a synthesis reaction. Excuse my spelling here. Okay, let's look at these slightly more complicated ones. So here I have PB. Again, I'm just focusing on the molecule, or in this case, the element, because there's only one element, plus HC is combined with L, right? And then PB is no longer single after this. In fact, it is now with Cl, and H is all by itself. Let me split up these two. So notice that here in this case, I have a single element and then two elements combined, and that forms a new couple or new pair of elements. So the single element PB is now a Cl, and H is all by itself, right? So in this case, because I have a single element each time, I'm looking at a single replacement reaction, right? So the single element that starts out here is A, right? So PB represents A, plus H is my letter B. B is with this element Cl, which is represented by C, right? But then after the arrow, A is no longer single. A is now bonded or hanging out with Cl, right? So A is now a C, and poor hydrogen, our green H, or maybe not poor hydrogen, maybe hydrogen is happy being single. So hydrogen is happy being single after the reaction. Right. So a couple of general tips as I'm doing this. If I see a plus sign before and after the arrow, I'm either looking at a single replacement, double replacement, or a combustion. If I see one element by itself, I'm probably looking at a single replacement. If I see two elements with the plus sign on both sides, or two pairs of elements, I'm probably looking at a double replacement. And if my product is always CO2 and H2O, I'm definitely looking at a combustion. If I only see one plus sign, either before the arrow or after the arrow, I'm probably looking at a combination or a synthesis reaction, right? So for example, this one, notice that there's a plus sign before the arrow and a plus sign after the arrow. So the only ones that look like that are single replacement, double replacement, and combustion. And if I look at the products, the product is not CO2 or H2O, so this cannot be a combustion reaction, right? I also don't see an element that's single here, because here we have Hg that's bonded with S, and then I have H that's bonded with Cl, right? So I have two couples that are bonded together, right? So this one is probably a double replacement reaction and not a single replacement reaction because there's no single element, right? And just to double check and confirm all of that, Hg is no longer with S after the reaction. Instead, it gets with Cl, right? And H from before the reaction or before the arrow is no longer with Cl, it's with S. Okay, so here they've swapped partners. So this is a double replacement reaction. So hopefully this helps you out a little bit. You should be able to complete the next couple of practice problems on your own.